All right, as people start filtering in, we're just going to get started here, and hopefully we'll get a bigger crowd. This is an interesting session. This name of the session is called Technology, Transportation, Big Data for Regulators and Airports, Managing Drivers by Electronic Means. We've heard about a little bit about it this morning and dabbled with it, but it's actually happening. I don't think anybody would think that hundreds of millions of dollars of money would be spent just on a transportation business. There's something called the digital mesh, which will basically engulf the entire world, where everyone's got a smartphone, and that's the only way people are going to be communicating, and all sorts of other good services will be collected, and data. And what we wanted to talk about today is how that data can be used by regulators to do a better job for the public and for themselves in their responsibilities and roles. So we've assembled three panelists who are going to each give presentations. The first is Chris Hayashi from San Francisco's MTA, who introduced a groundbreaking system known as ETA, which a lot of people know about, but there's a whole bunch of folks on the airport side that may not have ever heard of this. So she's going to talk about the system, the process, and what it's doing and what it is going to do. And then we have also Mark James, who's our Platinum Plus sponsor, who's basically been generous enough to sponsor all of the entertainment for both groups and also the entire dinner tonight. So we want to thank you, Mark. I call it a super duper Platinum Plus sponsorship. We've kind of risen above. And Mark's company, known as FTI, is the winning bidder and the winning contractor of a competitive process working with Chris and SFMTA. He's going to talk about not just his product and what it's doing, but how it could be used elsewhere, I assume. And also we have Lindy Burnham, a marketing specialist with the Hudson Group, moving ground transportation forward, and Ray's going to talk a little bit about synergies with both of you at the airports. And there's all these transponders and people going in and out and tracking, and we really want to learn how that data is captured and how it's used. And we encourage you to ask questions. We'll go through each presentation. Chris is going to start, and then we're going to go Mark, and then we're going to go to Lindy, and we will stop for questions. If you could probably entertain them during the presentation if it's up to them, but if not, certainly in between we want to ask those questions, and then have a bit of a panel discussion. And then Ray will be the closer. He'll be the Mariano Rivera of today, and be interspersed in the middle of all this. Okay, so without further ado, our regulator, who has now been elected to the board of directors of the IATR for all of her efforts in the last couple of years, really on the front lines of regulation, Chris Hayashi.
Thank you very much. I want to step back for just a moment and focus on what we do, what we're supposed to be doing. Why do we go to work every day? Why do they keep paying us a paycheck? What is it that we're supposed to be contributing to our society? And with respect to taxi regulation and limousine regulation, we're talking about on-demand, point-to-point transportation. We're trying to get people from point A to point B. We're trying to make it easy for people to get around. It's so important for our human bodies to move from place to place in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve in our daily lives. And that's critically important to everyone. Movement is critically important to everyone. And that's what we do. That's the business that we're in. So the question is, are we doing that? Are we making it possible for people to get transportation? What value are we contributing to our local communities? This has become particularly relevant now that we have competition. Several years ago when I started coming to the IATR, there was no issue of, is there another form of on-demand point-to-point transportation? But of course, in the last 2 years, we've seen competitive forms of transportation arising that do not have the benefit of regulation. And so I think it's really important that we all ask ourselves, what are we supposed to be doing? as regulators, and not just looking at the fleets and saying, you know, we expect you to perform to certain standards. Well, what are the standards that we are supposed to perform to? And we've actually, Dan Hara is here, is our consultant who's doing a best practices study for us. And one of the questions that we've asked Dan is, what are the performance standards for a regulator? How should we be measuring our own performance? Again, this is important because we have competition in the field. So, for example, we're charging permit fees. What is the value that our permit fees are providing to the regulated entities that are paying those fees? Why should they pay those fees at all when there are alternative modes apparently available? And I think that as society gets more and more complex as well, we also have to think about how we interact with other modes of transportation. In San Francisco, I have the good fortune of working for an agency that covers all 5 modes of transportation in the city. Literally, if it moves in San Francisco, we have something to do with it at the MTA, whether that's a pedestrian mode, a bicycle mode, a private automobile mode, a transit mode, or a for-hire vehicle mode. All of those come within our agency's jurisdiction, and we have to coordinate these different transportation functions. So all of that is relevant to how we perform every day and what we're doing. So I want to give you a little story. One case study in San Francisco that relates to data, and that is electronic trip sheets. We call them waybills in San Francisco. I think that's a misnomer because I think that applies to cargo, not people. So for the purpose of this discussion, I'll call them electronic trip sheets. And until May of this year, every taxi driver in San Francisco, and we have nearly 8,000 taxi drivers, nearly 2,000 taxis, was required to fill out a piece of paper on a clipboard every time that they picked up or dropped off somebody with respect to where they picked them up, where they dropped them off, how many people, what was the fare, what was the tip, what was the mileage. And if you talk about 30 million trips per year, that means that 30 million times per year in our very small city of 47 square miles, there is a taxi pulled over, probably double parked, and filling out a clipboard. And that's not particularly efficient. So one of the goals that I had when I first came in was to do away with this paper-based trip recording system, which, among other things, is completely useless as far as analyzing any kind of statistical information in our industry. So I was very proud of myself when we adopted a requirement that all trips be recorded electronically. As of June 1st, we told all taxi drivers that they no longer have to fill out the paper clipboard, but rather the payment service providers of our fleets are collecting the trip data that we can then receive as the regulator if we have any questions about what happened in a particular taxi. So I'm busy patting myself on the back for having that electronic revolution. And then it came to the point where we had to actually try to get some kind of information out of that data. And let me just tell you that big data is very, very, very big. And it serves no function whatsoever to have acres and acres and acres of Excel spreadsheets. I found that in the case of, we tried to do one analytical study of a 3-month period of a fleet of about 50 vehicles based on that electronic trip data, and it required an intern to spend about 20 hours getting any kind of useful information out of that data. So I'm happy that we don't have clipboards in taxis anymore, but that doesn't mean that my information needs have been satisfied. Quite to the contrary. And so one of the things that I want to communicate as part of this panel is that it's not enough to simply generate electronic information. You have to have the capacity to analyze that information in order for it to be useful in any form at all. What are some of the potential applications that I see in technology? I think that, as I mentioned earlier, we as regulators have to examine what we're doing. We have to evolve along with the industry. Change is inevitable, and we can't be seen as old fuddy-duddies that don't know how to program our VCRs or to update the reference, our DVRs. We need to get out ahead of all of this stuff that's happening in the industry. There's a tremendous amount of potential in data for regulating. For example, if you look at a taxi fleet in a city, it has a lot of potential for informing your traffic engineering function within the city to see where the taxis are going, to see how fast they're going, and to be able to analyze that in terms of your own transit systems, for example. We regulate the amount, in taxi regulation, you regulate the amount of the meter. In San Francisco, we regulate what the companies can charge to the drivers. We regulate almost every element of the economics of this industry, but in order to do that effectively, we need data on what the actual earnings are. And so without the benefit of that information, we're kind of flying blind. Emissions. Emissions is something that is becoming increasingly important in every jurisdiction. And it's important to be able to begin to get a handle on what's really happening out there in terms of emissions. Field enforcement. There is potential for taxi inspectors to become much, much more effective if they can access data in the field that is back home in the office, such as a driver disciplinary history, a vehicle inspection history, the trip history even, in order to be more effective in the field. Here's a huge issue. How often are our taxis empty as opposed to full? We have 2,000 vehicles driving around in San Francisco that I think have about a 40% efficiency. But I only guess that because I don't have any actual data. So that's something that we think is critically important. Again, our jurisdiction is only 47 square miles. It's one of the most congested cities in the country. And it's critically important to us for us to manage our traffic, to get the private vehicles out of the way of the transit system, to make sure that the taxis are running as effectively as possible, and to reduce congestion, reduce emissions, to free up parking spaces. All of these things are really important to us, but without knowing whether or not our taxis are operating effectively or not, it makes that kind of policy decision very difficult. Another example of what data can do for us as regulators is I am about to introduce to our board of directors a prohibition against medallion owners leasing out their medallion to a driver that doesn't have a medallion. In other words, either a fleet has to operate that medallion or the medallion owner themselves has to operate that medallion. How am I going to know whether a medallion is being operated by a company or is not being operated by a company? Well, as far as I know at this point, the only way I can tell is whether that vehicle goes back to the company property twice a day in order to change shifts. I have no way of knowing that at this point. I would very much like to know that because without that information, I have to rely on the regulated community to tell me whether or not a medallion is being leased. And so far, that has proved rather ineffective. Another issue for me as a manager is that my staff spends a tremendous amount of time doing data entry, filing paper and doing data entry. Every time a vehicle is introduced in our fleet or removed from our fleet, I receive a fax, a handwritten fax, that then my folks have to take and they have to enter a vehicle identification number and a driver's a license plate number and a model, a year, and all of that kind of stuff. So the fleet management has to fill out that form in paper. Then they have to fax it to us. Then my staff has to pull up that fax and do the data entry. That is a completely ridiculous system. And it has been said that San Francisco's fleet is 97% hybrid. That's probably outdated information, but I don't know because there's a stack of paper back home in my office that hasn't been input yet. So probably today, we're 99% hybrid, but I don't know, because that stack of paper has not been entered into our Excel spreadsheet system. We have a lot of problems of coordinating the driver database, for example. We have, as I said, nearly 8,000 drivers. But until recently, we had not developed any driver disciplinary history. So I had no way over the last several years of being able to tell you whether a driver was a continuing disciplinary problem, because I just don't have the data. And all of those things are critically important, whether your staff is working efficiently, whether you're able to identify relevant information for your jurisdiction that allows you to make policy decisions, that allows you to make disciplinary decisions, that allows you to understand what is going on in front of your nose. And I think that most, if not all of us, are lacking that kind of information. So there's really no excuse for that here in 2013, and it's time that we updated all of our regulatory technology, and we are trying to do that in San Francisco. Matt referred to the ETA system. This is an attempt by the City and County of San Francisco to compete, to allow the taxi industry to compete with what has been an incredibly effective transportation technology, and that is the smartphone, the e-hail. We want to see that technology used by our taxis in San Francisco, and it's been slow to spread. And so we have tried to speed that transition by trying to collect all of the dispatching data for the city and allow that to be accessed by smartphone applications. That's a process that's still continuing. I'm happy to talk to anybody about how that process is rolling out, but it's important. Technology is really important. The data is really important, and I want to emphasize that it's not enough to just get the data, that you have to have the capacity to analyze the data in order to make it meaningful, and then to act on that information once you have it. So I think that probably I should turn it over to greater minds and continue the discussion.
Well, I think you're a greater mind than I am anyway. Any questions for Chris? Okay, so Hina? Okay. Ray, you know how to work this thing, brother? We had it on the screen. I think it no. They didn't have computers when I was in law school, Ray. Yes, I'm that old. I have a great plastic surgeon, if anybody wants a referral. Not that you need it, you know. I think it may just be a screensaver, Ray, because it was on. Where are they when we need them? It's on the other screen. We get full screen. Slideshow. Sorry, Mark. Okay, Mark James.
I just used this.
Okay, great.
I am Mark James. I'm the CEO of FTI. And why don't I start with telling you a little history about FTI and who we are. We are from this industry. FTI was born from Frias Holding Company. Frias Holding Company is the largest owner-operator of taxi cabs in Las Vegas. We transport 1.6 million people every month in Frias taxi cabs. Frias also operates the largest curbside per capita operation at McCarran Airport in both terminals. So we are from this industry. I started out as the attorney for this company in my private practice, and I worked for a few years with Charlie Frias, who was a cab driver, started as a cab driver in Las Vegas in the early 1960s, working for a lady who had inherited Union Cab. Her name was Clella Mae Keckler, and her brother passed away, and she found out she was the owner of a taxi cab company. And Charlie went to work for her and was a stellar driver and turned out to be somebody that she decided to turn management of the company over, and ultimately he and Phyllis bought it in 1966 and built it into the largest taxi cab concern in Las Vegas. And in 2006, when Charlie passed away, I became the CEO of Frias and am now owner of 48% of the company. And so I have been working in this industry for the past almost 8 years now as a CEO of a transportation company. FTI was founded in 2010, and it was born of discussions between myself and our then IT manager, Jim Wisniewski, who now is the project manager for our San Francisco effort. But we were, like a lot of other companies, and I'm sure Bill can talk about this, and a lot of the other fleet owners that are here, we had been buying different technology systems over the years. Dispatch systems to integrate with our call centers, mobile data terminals that were offered by different vendors. In an operation like Frias, as you can imagine, we try to keep track of the fuel, which is actually part of the compensation for our drivers, who are all our employees, nearly 2,000 driver employees, and culminating in our purchase of credit card processing terminals for each and every one of our vehicles, which we got from Verifone, and we still have from Verifone. And they provided us a lot of data. We still get a lot of data from Verifone. That's our primary source of data that we use to report to regulatory agencies. But in this effort that we started in 2010, we began to try to see whether we could create some synthesis in the different technology systems that we had. And what we were really looking at is better ways for us to do our job as regulated entities. We, as Chris had just said earlier, all of our drivers keep paper trip sheets. There is a Nevada law at the state level that requires drivers to keep paper trip sheets, and for us to keep them for a minimum of 3 years, and we have rooms full of them. We actually have taken the initiative in the industry to put these on databases so that the regulators can have access to them, but there's no requirement that that happen in Nevada. So we began in 2011 session of the Nevada legislature with SB 320, where we updated the statutes in Nevada from a technology standpoint, or not requiring, but permitting for the first time electronic trip sheets, electronic reporting of data, the ability of the agency to have electronic access to taxi medallions and to check the validity of those medallions electronically. And we even updated the statute that governs taxi meters by allowing taxi meters no longer just to be sealed by physical seals, but to be sealed by electronically encrypted data packets that are sent to the taxi meter. We then attended the IATR session as FTI in 2011, and we went there to listen, to get information from regulators. Because we decided that our entry into this technology business was going to be different than some other people. We wanted to build a system for regulators. We wanted to build a system that would make taxi and for-hire vehicle regulation better, that would streamline the processes for regulators, and that would as a consequence, strengthen our industry. The growth of the smartphone application hailing systems was occurring like around the same time. And that just so happened that that was something that we felt our system also addresses. And so we went away from that session, and we had already begun building a system, and we ultimately came up with Ride Integrity. And that is the system that we have built. That is a system that is aimed at regulators, and I'll tell you a little bit how it works. But integrity is a word that is, the first definition is moral and ethical rectitude, which we certainly hope that we have that. But we are using the word integrity in its second and tertiary definitions, which are being whole, entire, or undiminished, a sound, unimpaired, or perfect condition or a system. And so what we're trying to do with Ride Integrity is provide regulators a way of accomplishing all of the things that they need to accomplish, essentially all of the things, with new technological tools, and Chris alluded to some of them. And they are principally real-time data collection and real-time analytics, and then we build upon that. So I push the red button? To the right, okay. Well, that's not how it's supposed to work there. No, okay, this slide is, shows the system and how it works and how it integrates with other systems. So as you can see up there, and my eyes are not very good, we are a system that will integrate with existing onboard technologies through an open API that will collect data and provide it to the Ride Integrity system, and then provide it to regulators on a dashboard that provides them with the analytics that they need for that data to instantly process it and put it in front of them in terms of specific drivers, specific fleets, specific geographic locations, specific time parameters, specific event parameters such as speed, trips, distance, other things like that. So let me come back to this slide, because this is the essential three parts of what Ride Integrity does. Is, as you can imagine, a system that is designed to collect information from a for-hire vehicle all the time, not just when it is on a trip with a passenger, and at a minimum of every 6 seconds, collects a lot of data. And so it's a system that has to be able to collect that data and do it in multiple jurisdictions, provide that data back to our cloud servers, and then provide it to the various participant jurisdictions. And also the fleets that are participating also have their own dashboard. And at the same time, as I mentioned, the real-time analytics, and then managed growth is just that, growth of data, and being able to, as the data scales, be able to provide these services with our system. So here's my other slide. Okay, these are supposed to come on here one at a time, and my guys promised me that it would, but it's not. So I'll just go through them from the top. So I have up there SFMTA and SB 430. This past session, we went back again to the Nevada legislature, and this was after the San Francisco RFI process had completed, and after we had completed contract negotiations with the SFMTA and began the implementation process in San Francisco. We went to Nevada to ask state-level lawmakers, because in Nevada, for-hire vehicle and taxicab regulation is done through 2 state agencies, not local agencies. And so we asked the legislature to require similar a similar system to be implemented in Nevada to what San Francisco had done. And as I go through this, I'll tell you how different jurisdictions have different things that they want and need based upon local demographics and cultural and business issues. So the first thing that the system has to do is integrate with existing technologies. And there's that word integration, integrity again. So the ability of our system to have an application programming interface with the software systems that are already on vehicles, and to in the first job to be able to take data directly from those systems like Verifone and CMT and Wireless Edge and all those other providers of dispatch and payment systems that are in the marketplace. And so we work with those companies and their technology teams, and we provide them with our APIs, and then we have our software talk to each other. So that provides us with real-time data collection. We also have another way that we can accomplish real-time data collection, and that is with our OBD device. And you see it down there. Part of the ride integrity system is the ability to take data directly from the car's computer from the OBD2 port. And there are other types of devices in the marketplace that do this. Ours is unique to our industry. And so it does not require integration with any other software system. It just requires data collection directly from the OBD device. And then it provides that information to the system, and then it provides real-time analytics associated with that. And so that's where things come like speed. Trips obviously comes from the other devices. The OBD device is itself connected to a GPS device, so it can provide locational information and other information. It also has access to the vehicle's performance, its fuel consumption, its if you've ever scrolled through on your car the various things that you see in the analytics for your car, you know, how long you've been driving, what your gas mileage has been over that period of time, how many miles you've traveled. So all those things are coming from your car's computer, and we're extracting that and providing it to our ride integrity system, and then providing it to the regulator if they choose to have that information. And at the same time, we're providing that information to the fleets. They have some of this data already, much of it that they don't have, and much of it they don't have in the form that we present it to them. One of the things that the Nevada fleets in our pilot program that's underway right now are most excited about is being able to have a lot of this other data that is not presented to them in the way we present it to them from our system. So at the same time we're solving regulatory issues, we are providing tools and benefits to fleets that operate in the industry. One of the things that San Francisco was very concerned about, and that was part of the RFI process when we participated in it, was San Francisco's desire to understand real-time supply and demand dynamics. Where were taxi cabs geographically located when they are needed in various parts of the city? Are there gluts of supply versus a paucity of supply? And we found that they found that there is that, but they didn't have sufficient information to make policy decisions and take policy initiatives, and so they needed this data. That was something very, very important to San Francisco. That's a little less important to Nevada, although it will become more important in the future. Nevada's was really concerned about regulatory and enforcement parameters. Medallion management. If you are operating in a fleet in Nevada, you know that one of the problems is that we have all these various different kinds of medallions. Time-restricted medallions, geographically restricted medallions, geographically restricted certificates. And these geographical restrictions are all a a policy initiative by the regulator to push cabs out of the resort corridor and into the neighborhoods. And it has been an abject failure. If you live in Las Vegas, or you have had an opportunity to stay with someone maybe sometime in Las Vegas, needed to get a taxi cab out to your home in a residential part of this city of 2.2 million people, you find out that it's virtually impossible. All taxi cab companies who operate call centers and dispatch systems in Las Vegas do so at a loss. It's so hard to get a taxi cab in Las Vegas to pick you up and take you to the airport, or pick you up from a local bar or nightclub or restaurant and take you home, that people will call 4 or 5 cab companies and take the first one that gets there. So the regulators have issued or rewarded the companies with geographically restricted medallions to say you can only operate these in the neighborhoods. Well, those still haven't worked. They've started whole companies that are restricted to one part of the community. Deluxe Cab in the south of Sunset, A Cab, which is only on the west side of town. Our company, A&LV Cab, has a series of medallions that are called North North, can only be operated in North Las Vegas. These do provide some service, and there is some service. These have been, I guess they're not completely a failure. Maybe I overstated by saying an abject failure, but they have been not nearly what they should be. And so what we're looking at with Ride Integrity is a virtual medallion. The ability to have a medallion that is tied into the car's systems and will only allow the car to operate as a taxi cab in service when it is operating in the proper geographic area. Same thing with time-restricted medallions, medallions that can only be taken out on the weekend. Our black medallions in Las Vegas are the ones that can only be on the weekend, so we can put those parameters in. Driver operating hours are a big issue, not really in Nevada because we're all employee drivers and we manage our shifts through fleets. But in a lot of places around the country, Denver is one that comes to mind, where drivers are independent contractors. The operating hours are a big concern. They're a safety concern. They're an issue that regulators want to be able to have better control of. This system allows them to have real-time information about that, to enforce it, and actually to be tied into the car's systems to, again, not allow the car to be in service if the driver operating hours are exceeded. Long hauling is a big issue in Las Vegas. And this is one of the things that spurred the Nevada legislature to take action. We obviously were advocating for our legislation, SB 430, that was passed and signed by the governor this past June. But the problem, the high-profile problem of long hauling in Las Vegas is something that got a lot of attention, gave our company a lot of attention, and then gave this legislation the boost it needed to get through both houses with only 2 negative votes, even though there was some opposition in the industry. There was a lot of support in the industry for Frias's efforts, but there was some opposition in the industry as well. But part of that impetus came from long hauling. If you've gotten in a cab in Las Vegas at the airport, you might haven't had the experience of going to a hotel that was located somewhere around Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard or Flamingo and Las Vegas Boulevard and been taken through the freeway, out through the tunnel, up the freeway, on a longer route than is necessary for that trip. And the fare difference can range from $14 the shorter way to $28 to $30 the other way. And so you can imagine it makes people very angry, and it gives Las Vegas a real black eye. So when we have somebody in their first contact or their last contact is realizing or having it dawn on them that they have been exploited by the taxi cab industry, they're angry, and that reflects badly. I've gotten letters. I got a letter from a guy in Vancouver who said, I am going to tell everybody in Vancouver not to go to Las Vegas because I got ripped off. And so, you know, that was in my capacity as CEO of Frias, and, you know, every one of those complaints, we write back to them, we email them, we send them a check for the fare, we investigate it. And I got a letter actually back, or an email back from that guy who said, wow, I didn't think you'd respond, and thank you so much. I will come back to Las Vegas now. And so it is a big issue. and it's something we want to deal with. So there's been various things. Do we go to a zone system? That's been part of the debate in Las Vegas. Or do we go to a zone system just from the airport? You can only charge a certain amount to certain places. Those have been a failure in a lot of places around the country. They work, but I don't think they would work in Las Vegas. We were opposed to that. We thought this technology solution was better, and the legislature agreed with us. So the system that will be mandated, it's mandated to begin implementation October 1 in Nevada, will be a system very much like SFMTA. We have not yet been selected as the contractor to fulfill this legislative mandate. We will be part of the process, and we hope to be that contractor. But that system will be able to do all of those things, and it's actually, if you want to look up SB 430, it's actually written into the bill. This system must be capable of all down the list of what it has to be able to do. Fare calculation is a big issue, and I'm not going too long, am I? I have a little more time. Part of this problem that the industry is having and grappling with these outside companies who have brought technology for e-hailing is fare calculation, that they're not tied into the meter, that their charges have to be input manually into a payment system, or they have to be part of a separate payment system that's not integrated with the meter. Amos's system, for example, is tied to the meter. So when the meter is reading, and the Taxi Magic system, same thing here in town, you see when you take a cab, the meter's showing you the fare, the system's showing you the fare. So it's tied into the meter. These other, a lot of these other systems that are where they recruit drivers for Uber or other types of apps like that are not tied into the meter. So we see the future, if there really is going to be, you know, some sort of détente, and we're going to have this coexistence of the regulated taxi cab industry, and we're going to have these third-party companies, which it looks like we're going to have as you know, partners of a sort. One of the things that's going to be critical is for them to be able to integrate with the taxi meter. And so part of the invention and part of the 5 patents that we have pending on the ride integrity system is to be able to calculate the taxi cab fare in the server, so that the data is collected from the car, the fare is calculated in the server, and then there's a readout in the car. The passenger, if they have a smartphone, can bring up the meter on their smartphone and see that same fare calculation. We think that that imbues the system with a greater trust. They can see with a little seal of the state of Nevada or the SFMTA or New York or whoever it might be, that this is the official taxi meter that's approved, and it's right here on my phone. It's the same thing I'm seeing that's being read out on the car's taxi meter screen. And so there you have it. But what that does allow, it allows then the regulator to have total control over integration with the payment calculation system. And we think that's a better solution, a far better solution than trying to take the entire weights and measures standards of Handbook 44 and port them over to some sort of a GPS device. We're very much against that, and we are right now in the process of working with weights and measures regulators from around the country, beginning with California, in Sacramento with the Department of Agriculture, in seeking approval of our taxi meter standard. And then to come to a conclusion, we obviously, one of the most important integrations with data collection and for-hire vehicle and taxi cab management is airports. In many cases, airports are the regulators of taxi cabs, or there may be, like in San Francisco, the ones who test the vehicles. And in any event, they need to have information about service to the airport, about who is servicing the airport. Many times there is information that both regulatory agencies might need, such as in San Francisco, the SFMTA wanting to know how many times a taxi cab goes to the airport instead of serving other parts of the city or taking someone from the airport and going somewhere else, but just going back to the airport. And there's even efforts to try to regulate the time for that. And our system can tie in, our system can provide that. It can be the regulatory system for an airport. And it has that capacity, as you can see, to do all the things for an airport that it's doing for hire vehicle and taxi regulators. But it can also, as we're going to be doing in San Francisco, integrate with a separate system from the airport. So we have a application programming interface with the software system that is managing and reporting to the airport. And then the bottom thing there probably scares a lot of people, but this is the way I think it should work. And I said this in Barcelona, and I'll say it again here, and probably in Boston and Amsterdam. Chris said something very key. She said, we want to see this new e-hailing technology. We think it's great. We think it's a great service to the public. Obviously, the public likes it. That's why these companies have gotten such traction. I wish that I and Bill and all the rest of us, we would have gotten together and decided to provide mutual dispatch and e-hailing among our fleets in the past. Some of us probably did, but we didn't do it enough, and we allowed third parties to come into our industry and provide us something that we weren't providing. I remember when I was first CEO of Frias, Pete Iliadis, who's one of the 7 owners of Yellow Checker Star Cab, our arch rival, sitting in an office with his cane and hitting it on the floor and saying, we need mutual dispatch. I want it. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not going to dispatch your cabs for you. I'm not going to participate in a system. So I was very thick-headed and backward, and I didn't take an opportunity back 6 years ago to begin something that probably would have been made history different, at least in Las Vegas. But now we're here. We have these other companies. We have people who have downloaded their apps, and they're going to be using them, and the industry needs to respond. So we need to provide this technology. The way we are trying to do it is through the government. This week, the Council of State Governments will be considering SB 430 as model legislation. NCSL will, ALEC will. We will be going to every single uniform code and legislative body, cooperation body in the country, and we intend to do so internationally, and proposing legislation like SB 430 that was implemented in Nevada. So I would encourage you to read it. You can go to nevadalegislature.gov, and you can very easily bring it up from the 2013 session. But one of the things it says is that this system that is adopted by the NTA and the TA in Nevada must provide the infrastructure for fleets to provide mutual dispatch and e-hailing. So in Nevada, and this had the support of the majority of fleets in Nevada, we will be doing this through government auspices. We hope that we will be providing a system like that in other places around the country. So that's how we see it. We see that if this happens, if governments take this initiative and provide this basis for us to provide infrastructure, that we can instantly have apps, and it can be anybody's app. So everybody's going to be able to be part of this. It will be an app that has every single taxi cab in that city on that app, not just the ones that have been recruited by various fleets or by some of these virtual fleets like Uber, who've recruited certain people to take their phone. So that's Ride Integrity, and we're very excited about it. We have an approach that involves going directly to you all, and I'm speaking to the regulators here, and we've built this system for you, and we've built this system for you to make our industry better because we're part of that industry.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, Jesse? You need a mic?
I do have to apologize for my question statement. We've been sitting here, Mark, for 20 minutes listening to your presentation. The topic is big data for regulators and airports managing drivers by electronic means. We just listened to a 20-minute sales pitch of FTI. I didn't hear you touch on data and the importance of data, how it's collected, how it's used. Basically, what I've heard you rehash is your company and rehash for what's been done in the industry for over 8 years now for free around by regulators. Matt, you started this in New York, big data. You could have talked about things of how the data has helped Homeland Security around the country. You could have talked about the police investigations that have helped by the data. You could have talked about the enforcement that's been helped around the country by the data. We've heard none of it. Is this panel going to talk on data?
Yeah, thanks for, I guess thanks for the question, Jesse. This is all about data. And this entire system is built on data collection. And I disagree with you. I don't think this is being done anywhere. And it's being done now. And this is a system that is based on the collection and the management of data. Big data is just that. It's systems like ours, like in Facebook, like Google, that have massive amounts of data, and the new ways of dealing with that and the uses for it. So everything we're talking about here is based on data, and that's the subject.
And I want to add here that there's a very important question related to data, and that is, who does it belong to? If you're a regulator, that data does not belong to you. It belongs to the fleet. It belongs to their payment service providers. It may be collected, but that doesn't mean that you can get it, and that doesn't mean that you can trust it, because it's coming from your regulated community. So I think that part of the discussion here is about regulators managing or being able to acquire and be informed by data that they can trust. And I wanted to add that because that's been critically important for us in San Francisco. We have tried to get all taxis on a smartphone application in order to compete with these companies that have arisen in our jurisdiction. And I have to say, if San Francisco had done this 2 years ago, I doubt you would have ever heard of Lyft or Sidecar. If San Francisco's taxi dispatching system had become effective, I don't think that these companies could exist.
I also think it's half about app management and half about effective regulation with lack of resources, because I can tell you that if you look at where the rogue apps have appeared, they have very clearly mapped out a strategy to go to places that have 2 inspectors for an entire city. And when you have a system which started in New York, but is really, it's even more elaborate in San Francisco, you could actually use the system, which the industry probably doesn't want to hear this, but use the system to generate summonses and take the place of enforcement officers. And no one around the country is saying, oh, we want to give our regulators more inspectors. If anything, they're cutting costs. So I view the use of data and systems as twofold. It's not just to make sure that, like Chris now has the ability, as we did in New York, to shut everybody up. There's no more 3 sets of books. What the passengers think, everybody's making, what the drivers are making, and what the industry claims they're making. The use of data will make the jobs easier. I would assume it might, make consultants' jobs easier, I would assume, or eliminate some of the work that they do in some respects, because now we're not guessing anymore about what's going on. You have the data. So I thought, Jesse, with all due respect, I think they kind of did talk about data here. I don't know where it's coming from, but we do have to move along. But Chris, you want to maybe...
I just want to follow up and say our attempt to get all taxis on smartphones failed because we did not own the data ourselves. So now we have to find a different way in order to collect the data, in order to put all taxis on a smartphone application, because of the resistance in the industry defeated our public purpose of trying to get people around to an ease of transportation. So it has become critically important in San Francisco for the regulator to have its own data.
This may not be an area where the regulators in the industry necessarily agree, or the app companies, but we thought it was important to get this out there. Everybody didn't agree with TPEP, if you remember, at the beginning than when we did it. In fact, I had to have people, protesting and yelling at me and screaming at me. But now, it became a standard in a lot of ways. So remember, Amos, don't forget what happened at the beginning of TPEP. It was not an easy implementation. And Jesse,
I didn't say anything.
You know what we went through. I mean, I had the union rat outside my office, and people calling me names and strikes. I mean, But now it's kind of mainstream. Did you want to say something, Amos? Yeah. Okay. I did.
Yeah, so I appreciate if you did. Look, I think that everything that's stated by Mark is very important. Mark has a lot of very deep knowledge, I think, in the industry. I think there's room for a lot of these improvements, but what I want to stand up and say is that the TPEP vendors collecting a humongous amount of data. New York City was the first one to collect it, and New York City managed to analyze it very properly. I think that one has nothing to do with the other. We're providing tons of data, anything from vehicle location, as Jesse mentioned. We were involved in many investigations, helping different agencies, government agencies, city agencies. The question I have is, everything that we collect, in New York City, for example, the data owned by the TLC, because it's stated so. San Francisco did not regulate this entire technology. We came into the market in San Francisco to provide basically, I believe it was the SEPTA card acceptance, and we introduced credit card acceptance. Later on, the authority came in and said, oh, you're collecting all this beautiful data, how can we use that? So my question is to Mark and Chris is, now you have all this beautiful and great amount of information, who's paying for it? Because in our case, basically, we are not charging for it.
Well, I mean, I think you are charging for it because you make money with your credit card systems and the passenger pays that. In Nevada, we have a $3 fee, and that pays for that system. And it pays for the data that we use and that we report to the regulator. And look, I'm not saying that I think the data that credit card processing systems have brought to the industry has been wonderful. I'm a beneficiary of it. We have used it. I'm sorry?
It's a misstatement. The technology that's provided by Amos and myself on the companies are not credit card processing systems. They're data collection systems. They were designed, built, and requested by MAT and regulators in cities to collect all the information about their vehicles from when the trips are recorded to replace the electronic trip sheet, to where the vehicles are at any time of day, to the amount of time in between trips so they can watch efficiency. It's been information that's been requested since 2006, collected in cities across the country. It's been available to regulators for free. Chris, it's been available in your market for free since the day we came in.
Okay.
You just never requested it and
Can
consolidated.
I answer Amos's question?
Yeah, we don't want this to evolve into a debate,
Yeah,
especially since we haven't heard from our third speaker. But why don't you respond, Mark, and then we'll go on to Lindy, who hasn't been heard at all.
Okay. Amos asked a very good question, and he made a good point, and that is we have good data from credit card processing systems that have been instituted in the industry, and that has been helpful. We believe what we're providing is something far beyond that, a generation beyond that. We don't see any reason why what we're doing can't coexist with the growth of the credit card processing side. I understand that I guess maybe CMT sees what we're doing as a threat to them. I totally disagree with what you're saying, Jesse. And what I'd like to do is just we'll battle it out in the marketplace. I mean, I think we'll see. I mean, I think we're both bidders on the contract in San Francisco. And at least San Francisco thought we were offering something different than what you're offering, and they selected us to do this. So we're gonna demonstrate it there. Something that's new always has some pushback, and your sentiments today are mild by comparison to what we heard from some of the members of the industry in Nevada when we passed SB 430. They were very against it, but the policymakers in Nevada, the policymakers in San Francisco have seen this as a way to go, and we want to prove them to be right.
Okay, I think we're out of time on that. Lindy? Hello. We have a presentation for you, or? There should be okay. All right.
Changing gears.
Now we're going to talk about airport data, right? Okay.
Driver and vehicle data and airport data. Excellent. Well, good afternoon, and I'd like to thank the AGTA and IATR for inviting the Hudson Group to participate in the session today. I am a product manager and marketing specialist with the Hudson Group out of Boston, Massachusetts. I'm going to go through just a very few slides that sort of show some of the ways that our system captures data, manages it for the benefit of operators primarily, who are then trying to meet the regulations imposed by the regulators in terms of reporting and so forth. So hopefully our company provides the type of solution that gives information that Chris is looking for in San Francisco. The Hudson Group is based in Boston, Massachusetts. We've been in business for 15 years. We are a service provider to the ground transportation industry. Our primary service is technology integrations, trying to integrate technologies and emerging technologies into the various fleets who are licensed to operate in airports around the world. Our primary product is called HGTS, which stands for the Hudson Ground Transportation System. Hudson and other similar companies that provide technology systems generate, as we've already discussed here this morning, very, very large volumes of data. Currently, the data is used by our transportation provider clients, that's who owns the data in this particular case, to then manage their business, improve operational efficiencies, but also meet the various reporting requirements, again, that the airports and regulating authorities put in place. Our system specifically is both multilingual and multi-currency. It does office reservations, dispatch, accounting, and reporting, the reporting probably being the most pertinent to today's discussion. We do also have web-based reservation systems. We do marketing websites, mobile ticketing kiosks. We do develop smartphone apps as well for our transportation provider clients, again, operating as licensed and regulated providers around the world. We do also have automated email and SMS notifications to travelers. We develop also network gateways to external reservation sources like Orbitz, Travelocity, and several other large travel entities. Our typical clients are the sedan and limousine operators, as well as shared ride, a little different from ride share. Shared ride being organizations like Go Airport Shuttle. That is one of our primary companies. We're the technology backbone to that particular organization. But charter and tour operators also use our system, as well as line run companies and some taxi operations. Our client base is throughout North America, South America, Europe, and Australia. You may have actually even seen or used our system without knowing it if you traveled with Go Best Express, the entity here in St. Louis who provided transportation for the conference. Whoop. Went a little bit further than I expected. You may have actually placed your ground transportation request for shuttle service between the airport and the hotel on one of our sites or systems. So HGTS and other systems like it, and there are many out there, and there will be many more that will come to market over the coming years when they see the revenue potential. Basically, they provide a means to collect data. And the more communication that there is going on between vehicles and drivers in the field and the back office system, the more data is being generated. We also have to account for all of that data and make sure that it's stored securely, especially in the age of PCI compliance. That's very, very critical. As an example, in the state or Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there's a law that basically says if you are storing any information about a Mass resident, regardless of where in the world you're doing business, you could be a Paris-based operator, but if you have a Massachusetts-based client and you have any kind of personal information on that person and that information is ever compromised, there's a $5,000 fine per incident or per breach. So it's very, very important that our systems store data securely for clients all over the world, and that's a very, very important component of the big data management. As Chris mentioned, one of the things that our system we're particularly proud of is the ability to manage and report. Again, most of our clients are the ground transportation operators. They aren't the regulators per se, but the regulators usually have specified reporting requirements for the operators, and our system sifts through in a process of reports and generates the information that the regulators require from the individual transportation provider companies. The other thing that we do allow for and provide for is the export of that data. So in the case of a regulator requiring direct data, not just paper reporting, we can provide that back-end data electronically very, very easily. The types of data I think are probably kind of obvious, but it bears mentioning. The types of things that these systems will capture and store, report on, analyze, and export include for drivers things like name, address, cell, pager, and email or contact information, date of birth. If it's a commercial, the driver holds a CDL, commercial driver's license, the date of birth, physical due date, date of hire, termination, driver rating and ranking within the organization, pay rates, the type of license that they hold, expiration dates, work schedules, hours and shifts worked, commendations, sanctions that may have been issued, accidents that the driver may have had, as well as violations. So these are all things that can be managed, exported, and reported on by the individual operator for the benefit of the regulators, should it be needed. Similarly, with vehicles, and our clients typically have anywhere from 10 to several hundred vehicles, doing from 50 or 60 airport runs per day to several thousand. The types of information that you would want on the vehicles in those fleets include year, make, model, the VIN number, seating capacity, mileage, registration renewal dates, vehicle options, such as what types of amenities are contained in the vehicle, the insurance company that has issued the policy on that vehicle, insurance expiration dates, inspection histories, both either internal within the fleet itself or externally by external agencies, the hours that the vehicle has been driven, accidents it may have been involved in, maintenance history and records, as well as the history of drivers who had operated that vehicle. Very important when you're trying to track down incidents or issues. One of the things that we offer to our operators as a tool to sort of help gather and manage, or generate anyway, some of this information is a virtual mobile data terminal. So instead of it being a standard or traditional MDT type device, we have it as an application that runs on a portable or mobile platform, most typically a tablet or iPad type device. Through these devices, drivers receive their work directly from dispatch, and all of these things are logged in real time in terms of when the work was delivered, what time it was acknowledged and received, and what time it was actually acted upon. The same device also provides turn-by-turn directions and mapping instructions between the pickup and drop-off locations, credit card swipe and signature capture, very, very important when operators are trying to prevent chargebacks. It's good to have that electronic signature capture. The devices issue receipts, both printed and by email. Obviously, drivers can use these to connect to the internet and get flight status updates on arriving and departing flights for their clients. They help provide least cost routing, showing the shortest and most economical way to get between any two locations, saving fuel, tolls, wear and tear in the vehicle, reducing idling time on highways and so forth. Traffic and weather alerts, and perhaps one of the oftentimes overlooked benefits of these devices is the quiet two-way messaging. Gone in many, many fleets now are the days of radios and pagers and cell phone use. These devices also issue immediate schedule updates to drivers, so as business evolves during the day and changes continuously, drivers are updated instantaneously. Vehicles are alerted when their clients have arrived, are curbside, and are ready to travel. The devices also issue automated client notifications either to their cell phone with pre-recorded messages saying your driver is now on site, please come outside when you're ready to travel, or perhaps even generating text messages with the same sort of message. They allow drivers to do job closeout in the field. This also eases the back-end accounting functions in the office and allows things to be closed out or finished in real time and build more quickly. Perhaps most important and relevant to today's discussion, obviously these devices provide real-time driver vehicle location and status both to fleet managers and dispatchers in the back end, as well as potentially to airport authorities who need to know exactly how many vehicles there are on an airport property at any given time. It creates a breadcrumb or trail history as well as in terms of where people have been. Geofencing is a technology which basically allows the device in a vehicle to know where it is, and when it enters a known area, such as a holding lot or a staging area, it will check the vehicle in, put them into a queue or staging status, and then automatically allow dispatchers or airport ground transportation managers to know which is the first vehicle in, the last vehicle in, so the first one in is the first one out, how long they've been waiting in queue, and so forth. Examples of what are going on, for example, down in Dallas. This technology also helps reduce dwell time at curbs. As vehicles arrive at a curb, the geofencing basically checks the vehicle in, and when the allotted or allowed amount of time has expired at the curb, the vehicle is flagged or the driver is notified, your time has expired, it's now time to leave and move on. So airports and regulators in real time can know, potentially through the operators with this data, the number and location of the vehicles on their property. They can know the number of passengers arriving and departing at individual curbsides and terminals or at the airport as a whole. They can monitor and manage congestion at the terminals. They can manage vehicles better or more efficiently in holding lots and staging areas. And they can, as I just mentioned, monitor some of the dwell time at terminals. Obviously, ongoing evolutions of technology are going to create ever-increasing volumes of data. Technology providers like the Hudson Group will continue to build tools and try to find ways to manage that data that will allow the operators to improve their operational efficiency as well as provide information that the regulators are looking for back on their end. Thank you.
Matt asked me to summarize, but to be quite honest with you, I'm the only thing between you and lunch, so it's going to be very, very brief. But to Chris, to Mark, to Lindy, we want to thank them very much. If there's one thing that's very obvious from those discussions is that there's more data and more technology that's out there now that we have capability to use as managers. We are catching up with it, but how we use it, who's going to pay for it, and how we actually achieve our objective, and that is to improve the level of services to both the airline traveling public and to the community in general. In Las Vegas, they have a tremendous problem of making sure that drivers take the short way from the airport. Chris has a tremendous problem of trying to make sure that her drivers do serve all parts of the community, and she's seeking ways to do that. And of course, Lindy represents data being used by, we consider to be very good, full service, both taxi and share ride companies, and how they improve their services, improve the income of their drivers, and make it a job worth keeping. So I think with data, we can achieve that, but we have to basically understand how to use it first, how to pay for it, and how to implement it to our systems. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.